So let's talk about automation. It's coming, and it's going to change, well, pretty much everything. The real question isn't if we'll have to deal with it, but how. Today, we're going to dive into a really radical idea, a new framework that tries to tackle this head on. And I mean radical. It rethinks everything from capitalism to what it even means to be valuable as a person. So, yeah, let's get right into it.
47%. I'm just going to let that number hang there for a second. 47%. Any guesses what that could be?
Well, according to a pretty famous study by some Oxford researchers, that's the percentage of U.S. jobs at risk from automation. Almost half the entire workforce. And look, this isn't some sci-fi movie plot. This is a real projection that's telling us a huge, huge societal shift is coming. Okay, so with numbers like that, you can see we're kind of on the edge of something big, right? That brings us to our first section here, a world on the precipice. The source material we're looking at says that, to even begin to figure this out, we first have to understand why this time it's different, why this wave of automation is a whole new ballgame.
So what's the big difference? Well, think about it like this. Past revolutions automated muscle power, right? Tractors, assembly lines, that kind of thing. This time, it's automating the mind. We're talking about brain labor, and it's not just one industry. It's everywhere. Manufacturing, retail, offices, you name it. And get this, the source points out that AI can already read and understand text better than the average person. Plus, the billions of dollars getting poured into AI companies, that just shows you how fast and explosive this whole thing is.
And we're not talking about some far-off future either. This is happening now. Take a look at this next number, 120 million.
Yeah, that's how many workers around the globe are going to need retraining. Not in a decade, but in the next 3 years, all because of AI. So you can see this isn't some distant problem we can ignore. It's right here, right now, and for sure, the clock is ticking.
All this pressure, this urgency, it creates this really powerful and kind of dangerous economic spiral. The document we're looking at calls it the key driver of this whole crisis. They call it the race to the bottom.
So what is that? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. Imagine one company starts using robots to save money. To stay in business, all its competitors have to do the exact same thing. And that kicks off this vicious cycle where wages get pushed down, jobs disappear, and this happens all over the world. It's this constant competitive pressure that in the end really just hurts workers.
And the stakes here they're incredibly high. This quote from the source really hits the nail on the head. Our whole economic system is built on the idea that certain things, like human labor, are scarce. But what happens when they're not? Well, the quote says it all. Our system has to adapt, or it could just fail.
Okay, so that's a pretty bleak picture. But the source doesn't just point out the problem. It actually proposes a solution. And that brings us to this brand new framework they call potentialism.
So, what is potentialism at its core? It's basically about shifting from what the source calls runaway capitalism, the system that encourages that race to the bottom, to something they call guided capitalism. The idea is to build in some safety rails, if you will, little course corrections that steer all that power of the market toward things that are actually good for everybody. Really, the whole point is to completely rewire what we as a society decide to value and reward. The document calls this eliminating false incentives. If you do that, you could get rid of a lot of corruption and weird priorities, free people up from boring, repetitive work, and actually unlock our real human potential, all in a system that's way more transparent and fair. Okay, that sounds great in theory, but how would it actually work? Well, the very first and maybe biggest step is to completely rethink how we measure value, not just for the economy, but for you, for me, for everybody.
The core idea here is a new metric called net benefit value, or NBV for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a replacement for GDP. But instead of just counting up all the money and economic stuff, NBV would actually reward people for their creative work, their moral contributions, their social impact, the stuff that actually makes society better.
And this isn't just a fantasy. There's actually a model for it. The source suggests using what's called the 6 capitals framework. It's an existing system that doesn't just look at money. It also includes things like human capital, our skills, social capital, our communities, and even natural capital, the environment. It's just a much, much more complete picture of what value really is. Now, imagine what this would do to the job market.
it would be a total game changer. All those repetitive, mind-numbing tasks, they'd be reduced. But the jobs that really need a human touch, things like R&D, caring for people, coming up with new ideas, creating art, those would be the jobs that get created and get rewarded. And all of this is building towards a much bigger vision, what the source calls a human-centered society. And it's exactly what it sounds like, a society built on a totally different set of priorities.
So how do we get there? Well, the document actually lays out a pretty clear 3-step plan. Step 1, give everyone a safety net with universal basic income, a UBI. Step 2, start using that net benefit value system we talked about to reward all the good stuff people are doing. And finally, step 3, roll out the whole framework and make this new human-centered economy a reality.
But you gotta understand, this isn't just about money and jobs. It's a huge cultural shift. It means we, as a society, would have to start seriously investing in the skills that robots just can't do. Things like empathy, creativity, resolving conflicts, and putting a real emphasis on learning throughout our entire lives. And, really importantly, destigmatizing mental health.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. A system that measures and rewards what you do for society? Wait a minute, isn't this just a social credit system? It's a fair question, and the source material actually tackles this concern directly. And here's their answer. It all comes down to how it's structured. They propose having the whole thing managed by rotating panels of experts, with everything open to public audits, so it's all transparent. And the goal is super specific. It's not about controlling people. It's just about fixing broken economic incentives and getting rid of things like crime that stem from them. That's it.
So, as we start to pull all this together, what's the big picture here? What's the ultimate vision? Could this really be, as the source suggests, the next logical step for capitalism itself?
The core argument, when you boil it all down, is this. Let's use automation for what it's good for, freeing us from all the boring, repetitive grunt work. Let's build a society that stops exploiting people and our planet and instead starts exploiting our one truly infinite resource, our own creativity. Look, there's no doubt the ideas in this framework are, well, they're incredibly ambitious. So I'll leave you with the big question to chew on. Is this a real blueprint for a better, more human future? Or is it just a dangerous fantasy? Definitely something to think about.